It's time to rip the cover off what really works to ditch addiction, depression, anger, anxiety, and all other kinds of human suffering. No, not sobriety. We're talking the F word here, freedom. We'll share straight from the trenches what we've learned from leaving our own addictions behind and coaching hundreds of others to do the same. And since it's such a heavy topic, we might as well have a good time while we're at it. And welcome back to the Alive and Free podcast. The last couple months, you've been listening to me and Jasmine riff about all things relationship difficulties and change and addiction and how does the wife heal and what do you do as parents and all that other stuff. And it's been a while that I've had other people on. She was one of the first ones I had on, and then we've had one or maybe two other people on. And so I thought I'd bring another person on today. Her name's Amber.
Hello.
And she was a client of mine early on for a number of years ago. She started working with me for different reasons than most people really think is possible. So what I want to do is take a step back and help you recognize one thing, right? The stuff that we work with clients and with the people who are struggling with things like trauma or PTSD or addiction or depression or anxiety, all the stuff that we're doing with them doesn't have to do with trying to solve those issues, because those issues are byproducts of how the person has lived their life. So if you think about a vending machine, which I'm sure those of you listening have seen one at some point in time, even if it's just a red box movie rental, even though those are going out by now, but in a vending machine, you put in your money, you push certain buttons, and then something comes out of it, right? And so a lot of times what people do is like something comes out of the machine called their human mind and body, and it's called depression or anxiety or trauma or something else like that. And they don't like it. And so what they're trying to do is prevent it from falling from the slot. So they'll either like snake their hand back up in the machine and try and stick it back in its spot. And a lot of drugs try to do this by preventing the body from letting it go, unhooking the little twirly gig so that it doesn't do it. But none of those things actually prevent it from happening at some point in time. Some people try to snake up and put good things in there, and they do this with like affirmations and stuff. Their brain produces all these negative thoughts, so they put an affirmation in there. And for the first few times, they've stocked that slot with a new kind of yummy candy, but then the next time it comes down, it's the old candy again. So trying to stop the body from producing these things, you have to take a different route. And that means working with the building blocks of the body. That means working with how your nervous system responds to its environment, how you breathe, how you move. They're simple things, and they're a lot more enjoyable to work with, frankly. But on top of that, what happens is that what that changes is now you're no longer pushing those buttons anymore, so you don't have to worry about it falling. And two, you're stocking something different inside that spot in the first place. So even if you do hit those buttons, a different reaction comes. That's when freedom is achieved. Now, Amber's situation, and I'll have her tell you a little bit about that, but it's going to be wide-ranging because we're dealing with chronic pain, autoimmune diseases, and compulsive behavior, and cravings and addictive substances, and emotional distress, and the whole gamut. And so I want you to hear from her what this is like, just so that you can see the link between it's not the kind of behavior or the kind of problem that you're having that's the issue. It's the cause, and the cause is the building blocks. And unless you work with those building blocks, you may find a life where you've managed to suppress the old symptom, and that's great. That's freedom for a lot of people. But if you really don't ever want to have to worry about it coming back, it takes a different type of work. And fortunately, it's not miserable work. It's fun. So there you go. So if you want to tell kind of how it started with your pain stuff.
As far as the addiction.
Yeah. And autoimmune diseases and stuff.
Yeah. So I had tried absolutely everything from both the medical world and the alternative medicine route. Tried it all.
What were you dealing with?
Oh, so this round, the decade of pain I was dealing with at the time was caused from Lyme disease and other infections that came along with that.
Okay.
And so it was causing massive pain in my bones, muscles, joints were red, inflamed and swollen, body just inflamed and carrying around way more fluid than needed to be. And so that was the struggle. And I just knew I was missing something. There was something that wasn't working. when looking at my system as a whole. I'd been to the specialists and the professionals that were sort of picking me apart just one piece at a time and trying to figure out maybe one thing, right? But then it would cause something else or it wouldn't get better. And I just wasn't getting anywhere with it.
But you had kind of come to terms with it, right? You had kind of been like, okay, well, this is just the way it's going to go. Let me live on with my life, right?
Yeah, exactly. I dealt with a raging pain pill addiction for 6-7 years. And then when the freedom specialist came into my life, I was 1 year past giving up all the pain pills and walking away cold turkey from that. The problem was I was white knuckling still every moment. It had been a year and still the cravings were intense. I would dream about being able to have medication again. My body, I was still having the problem with the pain. So the issues that were there that I was taking pain pills for to start with wasn't gone either. So it was just a whole host of what felt like everything was wrong.
But so we met because you had tried to move on.
Yeah, tried to move on, tried to live my life. I was at a mastermind trying to look at business stuff. It's hilarious now to look at what I was going to build a business apparently in my free, painful spare time. So
yeah, and the business you had a doTERRA business before, but you had stopped that because you were so unwell.
Yeah, I just felt like teaching classes about health and wellness isn't going to land so well from somebody who's really struggling to find any degree of health and wellness.
Right. And so, okay, this is the way I remember it. Maybe slightly different than her, but you've listened to the podcast about memory by now, so you know it's all up for grabs. But I went in just for a day. Like, it was part of a mastermind we were part of, and I just showed up because I wanted to be supportive of the guy leading it. I had some other things to go on, and I wasn't really keen on being there anyway because I was already on my way out of masterminds at the time and didn't really like them that much. But I showed up for a little bit of time and was there. And in the middle of it, we took a break, and Amber was out on the balcony and just seemed like she was having a rough time. And everybody else was powwowing inside. So I just walked out and I was like, hey, how's it going? We had a conversation and she was holding stuff, and I was, I could see it in her system. And so I was like, okay, well, do you mind if I try something? So I worked with the shoulders a little bit, and then we walked and talked. Everybody else in the mastermind was doing some other things. We talked about some things that were going on, ways that she saw herself, places that she felt stuck. And then I had to leave pretty soon, so I had to expedite the situation. Good.
Nice way to put it.
And so she was holding a lot right there in her back. And a lot of times what I've seen is we don't know what we're carrying. We're so used to it that we don't realize that we're still like the emergency brake is still on the car. And then you wonder why the light's on. And then all of a sudden it clicks like, oh, wait, let me take that one. Oh, that's why it was so hard driving down the driveway. So we don't realize it. And she had a lot knotted up in her back. And so I was like, okay, breathe in, breathe out. I got her breathing so that on an exhale, I've just thumped her on the back. And I thumped her once, twice. And then the third time I thumped her pretty hard with not like a fist. It was like with a closed hand, but like kind of cupped around over the top of her back. So I wasn't injuring the spine or anything. So we're just pushing the muscles and particularly trying to stimulate the nerves to be aware of what was going on. So she turns around. What did you think?
Well, it felt like a punch, not having any other context for it at the time, right? And so I was like, who is this guy who's punching me in the back? Who does he think he is? I remember like swinging and you jumping back with your arms up and being like, just breathe. Yeah. So I did that and I breathed. And then I just remember being like, what was that? And feeling like just confused in the moment right then.
And so I had to go pretty quickly, but the main guy leading the mastermind had to come over because he had noticed that we weren't participating and he was trying to get us all back in anyway. So I didn't get a chance to actually spend some time and sit with her. And so then I got a random text in the middle of the night. It was like 3 a.m. And
Yes. And I text because I recognized that all of the pain in my body was gone. I felt nothing, no pain at all. And I hadn't experienced that in over a decade. And so I was just sitting there like, I don't know who this guy is or what he does, but more of that, please. And so I remember reaching so careful for the phone so as not to lose all of the pain-freeness that was happening.
And so not all physical work has to be that intense or that expedited, for to use the term. But basically a massage is a certain amount of pressure on a muscle, and a punch or a hit or a thump or something like that. I mean, there's massage guns that are literally punching your muscle. It's just a really fast burst of pressure that does something different to the nervous system. And so I use it frequently, but I also use other types of physical work. Just depends on what the person's holding, how they're holding it, and whatnot. And so she and I worked physically some and whatnot. And then sometime after that, we got together with her doctor. And because her doctor was confused about how, tell him about some of the things that changed.
Yes. So I love this. When I had to quit treatments with my doctor for Lyme disease, that all happened around the same time that I walked away from the pain pills. And so the last she knew, she had prepared me like, this will end your life. It's kind of a matter of when. And we'd already been through a couple of episodes where she thought that I wasn't going to live much longer. And so after working with you, I think it had been a year working together. And then my husband said, hey, let's just get labs done and look at this. And I can see all the changes in you and feel them and experience them every day. But let's just see what the doctor says. Okay, well, not a terrible idea. So went and had the blood work done. And then she called to explain the blood work and ask me a whole bunch of questions because it didn't make sense. The things that were previously a really big problem were literally perfect. So gut health being one of the things. Before, she's like, I don't know how we're going to restore your digestive tract. Now she's on the phone telling me it's not that you're in a normal range. If I were to choose a perfect number, that's where you're at. It's incredible. Also, Lyme disease had affected my pancreas, insulin levels, and all of that was getting better. The amount of infection in my body that they were testing now was in the normal range when it had been out of control before. So a variety of things. And then just overall total body inflammation. That number was always in the red zone, she called it. And now it was perfect.
Yeah. So was it before the dinner that we did the heart thing?
We had the dinner after that.
Okay.
If you or someone you know is looking to drop the F-bomb of freedom in their life, whether that's from past trauma, depression, anxiety, addiction, or any other host of emotional and personal struggles, but they just don't know how or want some help doing it, head on over to thefreedomspecialist.com/feelbetternow and check out some of the things we've got in store for you, or book a call so we can look at your unique situation and get you the help that you're looking for.
So there were some of the numbers that weren't the same. And I think that this is an important point to bring up.
One number that was not good.
Yeah.
True.
And I think this is an important point to bring up because doctors are just looking at numbers and they know what's normal based on a population. If you think about the average American population, what they eat, how well they sleep, how stressed out they are, what kind of TV shows they watch, what kind of things they argue about, and all that other stuff, that's not exactly a paradigm example of what a human being is designed to function like. And if you remember way back in the episode on Science with a Grain of Salt, where I was talking about how the limitations of science, I recently found an article by a credentialed doctor and physician and person who's on the board of a number of prestigious committees and stuff around public health and all this other stuff. And he did an article where he pulled out the mathematics and the statistics around how research studies are inherently, every research finding is false. And he could prove it. And because it has to do with the variables of how the study comes about, the biases in the researchers and what they think of to study, and then what questions come from there, the things that aren't studied, how the design of it, how many teams are involved, and all the different variables basically means that almost every single research finding turns out to be false. They tend to be a really good indication of the prevailing bias of the time. So whatever research is telling you is only telling you what is the common theme. Now, that's not all research, but a lot of the research that's telling you something different tends to get thrown out. But the common theme among research is that, generally speaking, it's just showing you the way people think right now. It's not actually showing you what's really happening underneath the hood, because all of that information has to be filtered for in order, they have to be looking for information. So what information are they looking for? And then they have to interpret the information. And then that also comes into play. So her doctor's doing her best.
Yes.
And she's a functional medicine doctor. So she's willing to straddle both sides of the line. We got holistic stuff and other stuff. And so she comes in and she has all this information and she's looking at Amber's labs. And to her, according to what she knows, there's goods and bads. And generally speaking, they're right. Like massive inflammation in the body is not a huge thing. The cardiac inflammation number, though, was insane.
I love this story. I really do. So while I had worked with her for the 8 years previously, my cardiac inflammation number was a 2. And to be a happy, healthy, functioning adult, they would like your number to be below a 1. And the closer you get to a 5, the more serious things get, the more inflammation's there. At a 5, the way it was explained to me is you're really just waiting for a heart attack or some kind of major event to happen with your heart. And so my number had been previously a 2. And this time when the blood was drawn, all the other numbers were fantastic. And the cardiac inflammation number was a 4.
So the doctor didn't have know what to do about it. So what'd she tell you?
Yeah. So I said, what would you tell me? What do you say? She said, if I thought you would do it, I'd admit you to the hospital today. I know that you won't. Even if I put you there, there's no treatment that we haven't tried and your number never moved. It impacted you, not at all. So the only thing I can tell you after everything you've shared with me is my greatest advice would be to go have Bob put a stick in it.
So sometimes I'll use sticks sometimes to push on bodies and to kind of open things up, because sometimes a human finger, the body reacts to and fights a little differently than it would with like stick or metal or something like that. And we have various different thicknesses depending on what we're trying to help the body release. So she comes in and turns out that, well, we're working with stuff that's going on. Her husband, a firefighter, he's like, but if Bob, hits you, he might give you a heart attack.
Yep. He is a little concerned about that when dealing with a swollen heart.
Good job, protective husband. We love that. And so, we worked pretty gently at first, just kind of massaging along the areas where the heart functions. And then as I started going on, these memories started coming up that were just memories of some experiences that she'd had as a kid. And so we just worked through this whole thing. By the end of that, tell me what that was like.
The end was incredible, especially as compared to where it started. I didn't notice physically that my chest was actually uneven, like raised up on the left-hand side. And I remember you putting your hand there being like, okay, a lot is going on here. At the end, it was total peace, relaxation. I didn't feel the weight in my chest, which I just kind of thought was part of being me. I didn't know anymore that was something that could shift or go away, or that I could have any impact over at all.
I think that brings up a good point. Most of what people think about of themselves is basically a memorized tension pattern, a memorized set of like, oh, this is what my body feels like. This is what my emotions feel like. And when a lot of times they think they're an addict or they think they're depressed and they think these all the other things. And there's resistance to a lot of possibilities of change sometimes because it feels like you're dying. It feels like you're losing that sense of self. Did that happen for you?
While I was in the session with you?
Or after or anything like that?
It didn't for me necessarily. I did feel like, I remember experiencing a lot of fear during the session. And I remember it being really not logical at all. Like, what am I afraid of? And nothing's happening in this moment, but just a lot of fears that was changing.
So it was more on like a body level.
Yeah, for me.
Okay. So she left, running around, giddy, happy, whatever, leaving. And then her doctor, literally they had blood work done right after, and her cardiac inflammation number came back as?
The number came back. She called me 4 days later, 0.5.
So it had gone that far. And so she decided, let's have a dinner, let's talk, and let's see what's going on. So I met with this doctor, and she's curious about what it is that we're doing. I'm curious about her level of things. And I remember at one point in the conversation, she was like, I can cure an addict. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
She's like, I can cure an addict. Give me 2 weeks with them. I bring them in. I'll rebalance all their levels, all their hormone levels and everything else, and they'll be cured. They won't be an addict anymore. But she's like, but then the problem is they'll go back to their life and they'll do it again. Now, this is the exact same result pretty much, that people back in the 1920s had around addicts, that there is no biological marker for it. There's nothing in the body that is addictive in nature. There's no biological, even with all the fancy doodads and gadgets and gizmos that we have today, there is no biological marker for it. Maybe I need to put that in the book with what she said, but there's nothing there because what's going on, she says, all the research points to, well, it's trauma, which is what Gabor Mate talks about. And I actually think that's an overestimation of things. I mean, you could call all kinds of things trauma, but the kinds of things that they're talking about as trauma is probably most of the people I've worked with haven't been traumatized in that way. There's a large percentage of them, maybe 60-ish% have been through some kind of bullying or abuse or something, but there's a whole 40 to 50% that they just had a great life and they're stuck in some compulsive pattern. And so, she said, what it comes down to is trauma. And she's like, we don't deal with trauma. I don't deal with trauma. I don't know how to do it. And what was your reaction to that?
I sat there listening, thinking, I've never really seen myself as someone who's been through trauma. But when I stop and think about what my body's been through, where my mind was, right, all those years and what I was going through and really reoffending myself on the regular without even knowing, I was like, well, oh, wow, that feels like such a giant piece. So many people trying to get through their situation, get on the other side of it, right? Or manage it in some way. And if we're not dealing with the underlying foundational issue or what's possibly going on in the body and mind, how is any of this going to be a lasting positive result?
Yeah. And this is where it's tempting to like jump ship and be like, oh, well, that therapy's bad. And this one's the answer now. And you get the kind of miracle cure craze that goes on, right? This is where I think it's important to think about computers. No, I'm not joking with you. If you think about a computer, especially the old school ones, nowadays they're all one piece, but the old school computers had a monitor and they had a keyboard and they had a mouse and they had the CPU and the CPU had a motherboard and it had a disk drive and it had, for those of you that don't know what a disk drive is, go Google it. And it had a power cable and it had a printer and it had all these different pieces, right? And every single piece is essential to it working, right? If I take the motherboard out, it doesn't matter if I have the power cable. It's not going to do anything. If I have the motherboard, but I don't have a power cable, it's not going to do anything. And so I could sit there and talk about the power cable. This is the most essential piece to the thing. This is the key to the overall health and well-being of your computer. So we get you the top of the line power cable, but you still don't have a monitor. It's not going to help. And so specialization, as much as modern society and modern science and modern medicine has pushed towards specialization is death. Because what it does is it cuts up a human to try and study a piece of it, thinking that fixing that piece will fix the whole human, without realizing that a human being is a lot of integrated pieces all working together at the same time. So the stuff that we're working with, especially at the retreats, but on the preparatory work, the stuff we do online with people and coaching, is a full person spectrum of processes that are the building blocks, the buttons you push on the machine, so to speak, and what you stock in the machine in order to make sure that what you're getting as a byproduct, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, is something really, really healthy. So Amber has been through, she went to a retreat the first time. What changed for you at the retreat?
So much as it pertains to the retreat. And that really surprised me because I had been working with you before that, and I was getting some great results and feeling so much better and so different. But at the retreat, I got to see how this kind of work actually translates into real life, how I could live differently in a way that would genuinely benefit my entire system and not make it sort of another thing on the to-do list, but really make it part of my life. That, as well as breath work, doing that all together as a group, and the physical work we were doing, all the different things, and then hearing other people's stories. I really think for me, inside that space, my brain just blew open with a possibility. Like, look at all these different women from all these different walks of life dealing with all of these different things. And something unites every single one of them. And that is, they're feeling better. They're feeling different. They're experiencing something beyond what they had. It's a level of freedom that they hadn't experienced before. And it didn't matter if they were there because of physical pain or they were there because they just wanted to wake up in the morning feeling differently, or had been battling depression or loss. It just was so all encompassing. And that was the first time that my brain was like, oh, right. Dealing with the entire person, the whole system. That's what's going on here.
Yeah, I had a guy the other day going like, oh, he reached out to me, some young guy in his 20s, and he was like, I used to coach people dealing with anxiety and depression. He's like, but it was just so toxic that I had to get out of it. He's a business coach now, teaching people how to make millions online or something, and had reached out mostly because he wanted me to be a client, which I was like, thanks. I've been around the block with those types of things. But he reached out and he was like, so what's your secret? And I was like, well, you have to deal with the whole person, and most of what we're doing is dealing with the body as the building blocks. And he's like, well, so you mean like nutrition, diet? And I was like, well, that's a piece of it because, 90% of the serotonin in your body is produced in your gut. So yeah, that's a piece of it. But if all you deal with is somebody's food, but then stick them inside of a toxic relationship, or you make it so that they can't breathe well, or they have hypertension, or they don't know how to manage emotional stresses, or any number of other things, well, okay, cool. They're feeling better because you've helped one piece, but you haven't really freed the person, nor have you empowered them. And so a lot of people kind of wonder about what's going on inside of these retreats because, well, we're sort of tight-lipped about some of it, but basically we're taking you through all of the building blocks that are needed. We've established the nutrition at the retreat so that it's something that's very healthy, so that it allows the body a chance to kind of be in a state that's at ease while we're there. We're working with the psychological piece to help all of the struggles associated with it. We're working with the muscle tension in the system. We're working with blood flow. We're working with breathing, not just breath work and like laying down and breathing a bunch, but movement and breathing. We're working with retraining the nervous system's response to stresses so that the body just learns a new pattern. Because ultimately what it boils down to, and I've said this on this podcast many times, is that what entertains you trains you. What involves you evolves you. And what informs you transforms you. What you tune into, you turn into. Like the more you involve yourself with processes and practices that train your body to operate at a really healthy level, it will naturally happen on its own. So what we see is these people leave the retreat and they didn't know that kind of freedom was possible. 1. 2, suddenly life is tons easier. And 3, on top of it, they've discovered skill sets that actually have empowered them to be able to do stuff in their life. Whether they choose to do that moving forward, that's each person has a different approach to that. And it depends on whether or not they're in kind of an addictive pattern or relationship stress or stuff like that. And then we have to kind of work with them a little bit differently. But when it comes down to it, at the base, one of the main reasons I wanted to have Amber speak to this is because we haven't talked about the physical health side very much, or it's linked to the emotional stuff. How much have your emotions changed as your physical body has shifted?
How to quantify that? I can tell you that nothing feels the same. That was the first thing that my family started responding to, was how my reactions were different, how just sort of these outbursts or the frustration that would build and build and build, and the tension that I was carrying around. And though I tried to hide it, right, it was still coming out or still very evident. But with the retraining of the nervous system and not feeling that, not allowing the tension to build, just living that moment as it is, I would just had total choice in how to respond. And there is a relaxation and an ease that comes with that is truly apparent in the eyes, on the face, in the body. And I have experienced all of that. And now that's just life. That's what it feels like to live inside my skin. It's incredible.
Would you, at the time that, before we started kind of working with your situation, at the time that we met, at that time you would have said you were a happy person?
I would have. I had some things going on, but I would have said overall, sure, aside from these things I'm attempting to compartmentalize, I'm optimistic. I still believe tomorrow can be better than today. And I thought that I was managing that stuff in the best way that I knew how, and that it wasn't really impacting me that much. I had no idea. So
now, looking back and what you're able to experience with yourself now, how would you rate your happiness level then? Even though at the time you might have rated it at a 9 or a 10. Now looking back, how would you compare them?
A two, if that, honestly. I just had because I had nothing to compare it to. I had no idea what was possible. No clue. And so looking at life now and just how I feel, how I wake up, how I go to bed, all of the things, look at my different relationships and everything, how I respond to life. I'm not interested in going backwards. Super glad we're not going that way.
Yeah, we get a lot of people that I've heard this a lot. You've probably heard, you've mentioned it, where I talk about what we do, and the reaction is, well, I don't have a problem that big, so I probably don't need it. And so these are people that are like, you see that they're stressed, you see they're anxious. A lot of them are on antidepressants or anxiety meds or maybe physical ailment pills or something that they're managing a chronic pain situation where they're like, no, I just have some back pain because I'm getting old. Newsflash. It's not age that makes pain show up. Not at all. I have a newspaper article from 1933 about a guy who died at 197 when they went and investigated to make sure they hadn't made an error. It turns out his age was 256. He was 7 feet plus tall, had 17 wives, wasn't celibate, broke all the rules. And he was perfectly healthy. It's not age that does it. Maybe there was some genetics that helped out. Yes, he lived in the mountains for the first 100 years of his life and was an herbalist and stuff. So not big city life. That's fine. Age is not what makes things happen. Right now in our society, we look at age as a disease. And in fact, there is literally a war on aging. As if for some reason it's somehow negative, but it's not age that's the problem. It's that we're using our human mechanism in a way that causes it to deteriorate. Somebody has pain in one knee and they're like, oh man, it's just when you get old. I go, cool. How old's your other knee? And they're like, oh, wait, hold on a second. It's not age that's doing it. It's misalignment and poor use of the body. And so there are people all over the planet that are struggling with all these different things. And chronic pains and emotional struggles and just buildup of stress, just because that's how they've learned. That's how they've been trained throughout their life to operate, not because they're bad people. And they don't realize, they think, oh no, I don't have a big problem. Mine's not an addiction or a bad thing. And so they forego all of this stuff, all the possibility, because they think, well, no, I can cope with it. And then life becomes an endurance test. What would you say to them, having been on both sides of that?
Oh, my goodness. Having been on both sides, I can tell you that, even people in my life, right, that don't have the same story as mine, where it wasn't this big thing, but it was just one small thing, which then they adjust, right? They manage. And then another they consider small thing shows up. And pretty soon they truly have no idea how far off the path of health, wellness, happiness, experiencing joy on the daily that they've traveled. And so I really feel like everything is possible. All of the happiness and how good it feels to just live and wake up and have a body. And so if there's anything at all that one would want to shift, everything is possible here. And if there isn't even anything that comes to mind, what's still possible beyond what you're living every day right now? You just don't know what you do not know.
And so there's a lot of you out there that are probably used to being the bottom of the totem pole, the one that the bus gets driven over, the one that sacrifices themselves for the good of the whole. And maybe you've forgotten that you too deserve to be healthy and happy and have well-being, that it isn't about enduring and fixing and doing what you're supposed to. That all can happen, but why not have it happen in a healthy, happy state? And so if life feels heavy at all, there is a way. And if you need to go to our website and check out some of our programs, thefreedomspecialist.com, we have a new website that has, so you can kind of navigate some things and check some things out. Just to Choose Your Own Emotion program would be a great place to start. Or if there's some deeper things that you want to look at, or if you're just curious about the human mind and body and want to learn and want to explore the terrain of happiness and health and well-being, today, more than anything, I want you to know that there's a possibility that you're never stuck. And that, as much as you may have been taught that this is the way things are, all of us on the planet, nobody really knows much. the medical professionals are all good people doing their best, and they do help a lot of people mitigate stuff. But most of the time, it's getting rid of symptoms. It's trying to stop the vending machine from doing stuff, but it's not retraining the person to quit pushing those buttons or restocking the vending machine with something different. Even in the psychological world, the National Institute of Mental Health, the former head of it, Thomas Insel, he one time said to author Michael Pollan, who had written a book around psychedelics and their use in mental health, he thanked him because he's like, our field is broken. We don't actually have answers. We need more tools. We're just at best helping with symptoms. And that's the head of the National Institute for Mental Health. So all the authorities that you're looking to, they're all great people. They're all looking for solutions. But a lot of it is guesswork. And it's okay if you're willing to use them as a resource. There's nothing wrong with using conventional medicine. But there are other resources out there. And we're one of them. We're not the only way of doing things, but it's a pretty holistic way of working. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't require a ton of extra equipment because you're just working with your mind and your body and your breath and your movement and your posture and your, stuff like that. So if you are looking for some help and if you're struggling with things that are outside the realm of mental health or not big enough to be a real problem, and it's not about having a problem. It's about you have a very limited time on this planet. And the clock's ticking and you don't get these moments back. And isn't it time that you start living those moments, giving yourself the best chance to be happy and healthy and whole? So if you'd like to come to one of our retreats, by the way, and go through some of the more intensive processes so that it all happens at once and you don't have to spend all the rest of this time figuring it out. We do have one for women coming up at the end of this month. We only do one of those per year. And so that's coming up pretty quickly in just a couple of weeks. And so if there's a woman in your life that you know of that could benefit from that, to be able to just set down any burdens, whether it's past trauma and abuse from childhood, whether it's something that's currently going on, whatever it is, and to be able to set it down and move on, that's coming up quick. We're happy to talk with her and see if it's something that would be beneficial. No pressure at all. And for men, we do have a retreat coming up in May and then a couple of ones coming up later this year. So there are some opportunities available if you would really like to take a few days and turn some things around for yourself. But whatever you do something. Step into your life with more intensity moving forward so that joy is something that becomes a part of your daily life and not just something you work toward and hopefully achieve at the end.
And that's it for today's Alive and Free podcast. If you enjoyed this show and want some more freedom bombs landing in your earbuds, subscribe right now at wherever you get your podcasts from. And while you're at it, give us a rating and a review. It'll help us keep delivering great stuff to you. Plus, it's just nice to be nice.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.